and welcome to the Word of Truth, the Sunday School class of the air with your teacher, Rod Payne. The Word of Truth.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're watching this program. I hope that you're having a great day. I know in the midst of everything that's going on, it is difficult sometimes to do that. But my prayer for you is that God is sustaining you during these times, that God is refreshing you during these times, and that God is giving you a tranquility, a peace that passes all understanding, even in the midst of an international, a global tumult. I know, because I'm living at the same time that you're living, that we're all going through some really difficult times. And here we are nearing the middle to end of August, end of August as we're approaching these last few lessons. And this is our last lesson together in the book of Proverbs. And then next week and the week following, we'll be in the Song of Songs, and I will do my best to not blush throughout those presentations. But nevertheless, as we are here in the month of August, I know there are a lot of things that are going on around the world, around the nation, in the state of Texas, and certainly right here in our area of Texas and some parts of southern Oklahoma, depending on where you're watching this. But I also know this. I know, as that classic hymn of the faith says, in its quoting scripture, I know in whom I have believed, and I am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I have committed, my life, unto him against that day. So my prayer for you is that you would know God's peace, the word that Jesus said, a peace that passes all understanding. Now, to that end, I know that some of you may be celebrating birthdays around this time. I want to wish you a very happy birthday. Some of you may be celebrating anniversaries of some kind. Perhaps with your spouse still here, perhaps with your spouse already translated into glory, but you still remember that anniversary. We're going to be talking today about a wife of noble character. So guys, I want you to perk up those ears, and gals, I'm praying that these descriptive passages from Proverbs address you, that you find kind of a narrative about your own life. I certainly have a great example, several of them as a matter of fact, in my own life, from my godly mom to my precious wife of more than 44 years. This passage is one of my favorite passages from the Bible because I've personally experienced a wife of noble character, and I've seen my mom be a wife of noble character as well. Remember, you can always write to us, so if you want to tell us, and by the way, we have been receiving more cards actually, or little notes lately than I can remember in maybe a long time, if not the history of my association with this broadcast and with this program. And thank you so much. We had a lady write to us all the way back in June, gave us a great idea. We're doing that on Sunday mornings. We've had others just to write and say, I watch the program every week. Some of them over the internet, I'll grant you, but most, by and large, over this station. So thank you to every one of you who are watching. Thank you for your prayers. I know the crew appreciates those prayers as well. Well, as I mentioned, we're completing now our study in the book of Proverbs, and then we will jump from Proverbs, we'll jump right past Ecclesiastes next week and go right to the Song of Songs. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, so let's camp out in Proverbs, the 31st chapter. Now, we find right off the bat that this passage in Proverbs, just as its preceding chapter in Proverbs, are not attributed to the normal author of Solomon that we would associate with by and large, the majority of Proverbs. But that's okay. This might have been an associate, as your quarterly correctly states, might have been someone who was perhaps even the record keeper or the transcriber of his thoughts or that kind of thing. In any respect, there's clearly a lot of wisdom to be found in this passage of what we call wisdom literature from the book of Proverbs. Now, this passage is often used in funeral settings, in memorial settings, in celebration of life settings, where it talks about, or where the individual addressed in that service has been a wife. And you'll see as we read this passage together how much it can apply to someone perhaps that you've known, or perhaps, and I may be speaking to some of you directly, perhaps to yourself as well. I met my now bride of more than 44 years when we were both in high school. I was finishing up high school and she was in the 10th grade. There was something different about her from the very beginning. One of the things was she was a Christian. At the time I first met my wife, I was not. I found by going to church and hearing about the good news of Jesus Christ, I found a whole new life that continues to this day in Jesus. But I also found that wife of noble character, because I found someone, as you look at Proverbs 31, it is an apt description of my bride. But enough about my life. Let's look at the way the noble wife is characterized in Proverbs. This is described in some translations of the Bible as being an epilogue. In other words, kind of a conclusion after the conclusion. We've all heard those ministers that say, in closing, and there's another 20 minutes left in the message, something along that nature. I personally may know one or two of those folks. But in any respect, this, in the NIV translation, this portion of Proverbs 31 is described as an epilogue, the wife of noble character. And I think what God is trying to show to us, among many other things in this passage, is don't discount this just because it seemingly is tacked on. But almost as importantly, pray as you read this passage and have God bring to mind, either as I pray, for some of you this is a description of yourself, or others. But let me say something specifically to grandparents, because I am one 3 times over. I have a grandson who's 19, I have a grandson who's 6, and I have a grandson who's 5. All 3 grandsons. I pray for each one of them. And one of my prayers is that they would meet and eventually, if it is God's will, wed this kind of a woman. It's not the outward beauty. That's important. I grant you that attraction between the two is what helps sparks that eventual romance, which hopefully eventually may lead to marriage. But it's not just that. It's character, and your quarterly so aptly describes there is a difference between character and sometimes conduct. Yeah. Sometimes people conduct themselves in a certain fashion, and that may be the right thing to do, but it's not actually reflective of their character. It may just be something that they do to expedite whatever matters that they wish to address. But when you find someone whose character is reflected in their conduct, and both are reflective of God and His principles, His precepts, His glory, then you find that rare thing as described in Proverbs 31. Proverbs 31 verse 10, a wife of noble character is the way the NIV translation gives it to us. You may have a different translation, but as I have shared over the last almost 3 decades, this is the translation I prefer. And you can tell that mine is well worn with that duct tape applied to its spine. A wife of noble character, who can find? She's worth far more than rubies. We are to esteem, we are to value that mate that God has given us. Guys, let me speak to you. I trust that that's the way you address your spouse. Not in a condescending, not in a commanding, not in a, and of course in my house none of that would ever fly anyway, but not in a methodology of putting them down or something like that, but rather valuing them. If she's worth far more than rubies, a wife of noble character, if she's worth more than rubies, we're equating it in this day and time to being almost valueless. I mean, without innumerable, without ability really to put a monetary price tag on. She's worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. I have confidence in Vicki. I know that she has my best interest, the best interest of our family, and more importantly, the best interest of serving her Savior at heart. When you have confidence in that other individual in a marriage, it's more than a two-way street. In all sincerity, it's a one-way street with both of you headed in the same direction. Now, when you're praying for your grandchildren, one of the things that you can do is pray that they'll find some person in that mate that God has planned for them, that they'll find that person in that life partner, in that spouse. By the way, life partner is probably the wrong term to use in today's day, when life partner can describe any number of different relationships, and they're all apparently legal in the United States and most other countries around the world. When they find that marriage partner, let me put it like that, when they find that lifelong spouse, I hope that they find someone that they can agree with. Now, there have been times we call them lively discussions at our home. Some folks might call them arguments. You phrase it the way you wish. At our house, sometimes we have what are called lively discussions. We don't always see eye to eye, but in the end, we decide. And we really use the passage of Scripture that tells, I'm supposed to be the spiritual head of our home. Would I tell you that has always been the case in our 44 years of marriage? Absolutely not. May I confess something to you? I have been, in the past, derelict in that duty on more than one occasion. But God brought those things to my mind, asked me to apologize for them, and in all sincerity, I've done a lot better. What happens when the two of you are in agreement? You go further. Just think about this for a moment. When they land one of those gigantic planes, let's say a 747 or a 737 or whatever 7, the guy behind the camera would know exactly what the nomenclature is. But when they land one of those large planes, when they're first approaching the airport, they still have some degree of thrust. In other words, their engines are pushing the plane forward. But as they descend, they back off on that thrust to nil. And in fact, as they place wheels down onto the tarmac or onto the runway, they actually apply a reverse to that engine. And now that engine, instead of pushing them forward, is actually resisting the forward momentum of that craft. If the husband and wife are not unified, if they're not going along, I'm not saying in lockstep, there can be those lively discussions, but if eventually they don't come to some kind of consensus, that's that plane. It was going forward, but now we've applied the reverse thrust to the engine, and now it's slowing as it's going to eventually come to a stop if everything is functioning properly. If you want to move forward in unity. He has confidence in her. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. Oh my, what a blessing to hear. She brings him good, not harm. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. This is not a lazy bone person. The other day I was in a meeting and somebody brought up the great composer Hoagy Carmichael. And I loved Hoagy Carmichael. He had a body of work in the Americana music that is very, very substantial. But one of his songs that I always enjoyed was Lazy Bones, sleeping in the shade, how you gonna get your... Well, this is not that kind of person, okay? The person being described here is a person who works with eager hands. If you can't describe yourself in that fashion, wives, think about it and ask yourself what could be done to address this situation. If, on the other hand, guys, there's no eagerness for the tasks because, in all sincerity, nothing she does is ever right for you, there's always some demeaning word to say, then you may wish to examine your response to what could have been eager work, selecting the wool and the flax, for instance, in verse 13, but you've never given the encouragement that would say, way to go, that's the ticket, let's keep on. Now, I'm not saying if the pie was served on a crust that was supposed to be baked but was not baked that you should, I did it, okay? First year of marriage, in fact, probably the first month of marriage. Miss Vicki can tell the story better than I, and in fact, I probably shouldn't tell it in this public forum. Let's just say when you buy a pie crust and it's dough as opposed to graham cracker, you're supposed to cook that crust. Okay? Just saying. That's just for those of you out there who haven't had an opportunity to read any of Miss Crocker's books yet. Okay? If you haven't availed yourself of Betty and her particular methodology of preparing food. Just going to leave that there. On the other hand, verse 14, she's like the merchant ships bringing her food from afar. In the days of Corona, many people are saying, I don't want to go get my food from afar. I want to have the food delivered to my door. I totally understand. But here's what the author is trying to say to us. The wisdom displayed here says, I will go to the lengths necessary to provide what God is making available for my family. And again, I've been so blessed in this particular case with my loving wife. And my prayer is, as I pray for my grandsons, they'll experience that same kind of willingness to go to the lengths necessary to provide as God makes it available. Now, I'm not saying she goes and robs a store to get Huggies, okay? I'm not saying that for the new baby. I'm not saying that she plays the ponies hoping to score the big money so that we can have more food. No, that's not what we're saying. He's saying that she goes to the lengths necessary. She's like merchant ships bringing her food from afar. Those merchant ships were not just going around the isthmus. They weren't just going from point A just a few channels, as they describe distance in ocean. They weren't just going a few channels away. No, they were going to the distance necessary to provide what was needed. Verse 15, she gets up while it's still dark, and she provides food for her family and portions for her servant girls. Now, this is not me condoning slavery, not even remotely. This is the day and time in which this passage was written. Remember what we've talked about before when we look at Bible study. The three, I say, pretty much essential elements. We're looking at the day and time at which it was written, or God gave it to them. Secondly, we're looking at its original intended audience. And third, we're saying, how do I apprehend, how do I get these things into my own life to help me follow God's will for my life? So when we look at this passage, understand, she's providing for her family, and she's also providing in all sincerity for those who are assisting her family. But the point of verse 15 is she gets up while it's still dark, providing food for her family. Now, in the day and time in which this passage was written, things are a little different. But I can remember back when I never lived on a farm, but I can remember back reading stories. I never experienced this personally. When the wife, the mom of all the farm, she gets up at the crack of dawn so she can have eggs and hominy and grits and flapjacks or biscuits and whatever else ready, because Dad and all the farm hands are getting up. They're going to come to the table hungry because they got a full day's work ahead of them in the fields. I've never experienced that. I've hauled hay, did not enjoy it, would not recommend it to anyone in any shape, form, or fashion, unless it's just you riding inside an air-conditioned cab of some form of vehicle that actually picks up the hay, rolls it up in some fashion, throws it onto the back of a large flatbed, and you stay there listening to great music in an air-conditioned cab. If it's the way I did it, 48, 50, something, maybe more than that years ago, I do not advise that. At the time in which this passage is written, and we find ourselves in Proverbs 31, she's getting up ahead of the rest of the house to ensure that everybody has a great breakfast. You know what they say, eat your breakfast like a king, your lunch like a prince, and your dinner like a pauper. So you shouldn't eat a big meal at the end of the day. She's up and she's ready to go, but your quarterly points out something even stronger. She is ready because she loves and she cares and she serves others. I can tell you, as I'm praying for my grandsons, my oldest grandson is going to need this kind of a wife. He's going to need an alarm clock wife, okay? One that when her alarm, be it internal or external, goes off, she's literally going to brace herself against something and with both feet kick him out of the bed, okay? This wife of noble character is up before the crack of dawn while it's still dark. Verse 16, she considers a field and she buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She invests wisely. One of the things that I always dread is income taxes. But you know what? I don't know why I dread them. They were due, if you remember, last month in July. And I was thinking, of course, they're normally due in April, but it's the year of the COVID-19, so different. Ours were finished on like 2 days before they were due, and I always dread that. But in all sincerity, Vicki does well with our money. We live in a home that's paid for. It's not a mansion. It's not an opulent house in any shape, form, or fashion. But it's paid for. We drive older cars, but we own them by and large. And the reason is because Vicki tries to be very fiscally conservative to some degree. And then there's times that you just scratch your head, at least I do. Where did that money go for what? But in all sincerity, this wife, and I believe mine as well, and I'm praying that many of you fit this description as well. She considers a field, she buys it. She looks at the property. She's got a good eye for that kind of thing. By the way, I know of several ladies who are in real estate, and I'll tell you, they do well. And I believe one of the reasons is because they're that Proverbs 31 woman. Then when she has the money that she's made from having done a great transaction in land, she then plants a vineyard, not so she can get drunk or get anybody else drunk. That's just a great way of making money in that day and time. Verse 17, she sets about her work. Here we have again a description of someone who is not a lazy bones, Hoagie Carmichael. Verse 17, she sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her tasks. Earlier we'd said that she has eager hands, and she sets about her work with eager hands, like she does good for everybody around her. Verse 13, she works again there with eager hands. Well, here we are again describing her as being somebody who's a go-getter. Okay, she's not laying back hoping that she's going to have grapes and great milk served or whatever. No, she's going forward and she's looking for opportunities to better the lives of those around her. You see, the self-sacrificial woman is the woman described in Proverbs 31. Not someone who looks to their own gain or looks to their own pleasure or looks to their own comfort, but rather is constantly looking for the betterment of all around them, especially their family. She sees that her trading, verse 18, is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. Again, I have to keep going back to personal experience, okay? In all sincerity, as Vicki has launched this ministry now, or this movement, whatever you want to say, to try to combat human trafficking, it has not been uncommon for her. I like to retire fairly early, and I like to read and go to sleep. I love sleep, in all sincerity, but I like to retire early and get up fairly early. I have experienced on more than one occasion that it was close to time for me to awaken, to get up and go for a run or go work out or whatever, and have my quiet time first. But as I'm rising, I'll notice she's retiring. And then she's only going to sleep a little while, and then she's up again. Well, eventually that catches up with her, and on occasion she'll crash. This woman described in Proverbs 31 is a woman who says, I got up early. She gets up while it's still dark, but it says her lamp doesn't go out at night. This is a person who's looking for, again, that opportunity to serve all around her. In her hand, she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. In other words, in all sincerity, in the one hand, she's kind of adjudicating. She's taking care of the business, if you will. But on the other hand, she's still the happy homemaker. You don't have to succeed on all levels to be a success, but you can succeed at what God presents to you if you're willing to do what He asks you. Listen to me again. You don't have to succeed on every level in order to be a success, but you can succeed on the levels that God presents to you when you do what He asks you to. The sad thing is, too many people, especially, let's go back to the days of what we used to term the glass ceiling. I remember a movie that was very, very popular back in the 80s called Baby Boom. And the movie was opened by a lady that was a famous journalist. She did the what do they call it? The dialogue over it, the read over, whatever you call it. She's talking while you're seeing scenes. And I believe her name was Linda Ellerby. And she said, you don't have to have it all, or you can't have it all. You can't have a career and have a family. And Baby Boom is all about how this lady inherits from relatives that she doesn't even remember a child. Both of her parents, the poor child's parents, die, and they give the baby to this lady who's described in advertising jargon as the Tiger Lady. But now she's suddenly faced with raising a child. But you know what? eventually she figures out how to start a business and still be mom to the child. Now, I'll grant you, there's not always parts of that movie that you want to endorse, certainly certain lifestyle aspects. But the bottom line was this. She found her niche and did it well. The bottom line is this. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, verse 21. They're all covered in scarlet, which, by the way, that's covering for royalty, which means even if they don't have a lot of money, she takes care of them like they're very, very important people. She makes covering for her bed. She's clothed in fine linen or purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate. I can tell you this, again from personal experience. I've lived in this community now for over 33 years. It was 33 back in July. I'm still known in most areas or many areas of this country as being Vicky's husband. You would think that could be a problem for me. Absolutely not. I'm thrilled because it means many, many people hold my wife in high esteem. Her husband is respected at the city gate where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them and supplies the merchants with sashes. Listen though, here's what she's clothed in. Verse 25. She's clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom and faithful instruction. She's clothed with what? Strength and dignity. Verse 30. Charm is deceptive. Beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. You know, one of the great sadnesses of modern times, let's say from 1900 on, I still call that modern time, was when celluloid, when film, when the capturing of images became so popular. Because as was portrayed in the movie Sunset Boulevard, when an actress has begun to fade from the resplendent beauty perhaps that was portrayed initially on the film to age, as is the natural biological progression of things, the difference that takes place, and yet always preserved in those archives of things like Turner Classic Movies and others, is the image that was initially portrayed to the public. But this Proverbs woman, no. Charm is deceptive, beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord, well, she's to be praised. And by the way, her inner beauty glows because she fears God and she serves God. Give her the reward she has earned and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. Give her the reward that she has earned. So ladies today, if you fit that Proverbs 31 woman, good for you. Let me give you an atta girl. That's a reward. My wife, yes, I love her dearly and I reward her each time I get the opportunity. But for all of you who are praying for your grandsons or granddaughters, pray that the granddaughters match up to this lady and pray that your grandsons meet somebody like her. Remember, you can always write to us at the Word of Truth, 1200 9th Street, Wichita Falls, Texas. Our zip code is 76301. That's the Word of Truth, 1200 9th Street, Wichita Falls, Texas. Our zip code is 76301. Next week and for the following week, we'll look at the Song of Solomon. I will see you next week, and I'll try my best not to blush as we look at the Song of Solomon next week here on the Word of Truth.
You've been watching the Word of Truth from First Baptist Church, Wichita Falls. Join us again next week for the Word of Truth.